Without reservation, it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, our keynote speaker, someone whose work has made a meaningful impact on the well-being of professionals in caregiving and healing roles. Dr. Lorre Laws is a respected leader in trauma-informed practice with deep expertise in the intersection of compassion, resilience, and professional sustainability. Today, she invites us to look deeper into the challenges we face as helpers and healers in a session called Rethinking Compassion Fatigue, Trauma-Informed Strategies for Professional Well-Being and Resilience. Dr. Laws will guide us in exploring new perspectives and practical tools to help us not only endure, but truly thrive in the essential work that we do. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lorre Laws. Good morning. I am so happy to see each of you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Diane, for that beautiful introduction. My name's Dr. Lorre, also known as Mom and Grandma to those closest to me. And today I've prepared a really, really wonderful presentation, at least I think so, and I hope by the end of our time together that you will think so as well. So are you guys ready to start rethinking compassion fatigue? Oh, let me hear that again. Are you ready? Yeah, okay, because I know they caffeinated y'all, so I am so ready to be here. And as my practice, I like to start with us coming together as an international community of healers, helping professionals, and first and foremost, as humans. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ring the three times my Tibetan bells. And just to get us to all come together in the same energetic space and let all of the stress of getting here and all the technology and all the things that we had to navigate to find ourselves together. So your job is just to listen until you can't hear the bell anymore. And right there will be your present moment. All right? So let's go ahead and come together. And then when you're ready, you can come back and join me here in our shared present moment. Thank you for that. I think that's always as much for me as it is for you. So let us just take one big conscious breath together, and just any negativity or any stress that is remaining, let's just inhale together and exhale it out. Doesn't that feel so good? If you have your cell phones, go ahead and keep them handy, because we're going to be doing some interactive things, but maybe silence them. And mine's in airplane mode. Never fails that one of my kids tries to call me when I'm doing this, so hopefully I won't be the notification offender. But whatever happens, happens, and it's all good. I want to extend just so much gratitude for Gluckstein lawyers, Bernie and Charlie, who I just met, and Diane Henderson. Where's Diane? There she is. You are such a light. Thank you, Diane. And Brenda. And where's Kate? Kate, oh my gosh, thank you. You have done so much and made this such a beautiful experience for all of us. So deep bow to Kate and my rock star tech duo over here, whose names at midnight last night escaped me. So you guys just are going to be rock stars. Are you cool with that? Okay, perfect. And the entire Gluckstein team, and of course our esteemed mayor. And most importantly, a deep bow of gratitude for each and every one of you, including our beautiful virtual audience, for taking time to choose yourself, to be open to learning and exploring and being curious, being receptive for healing. We all live in a world that is just overwhelming with competing demands most days. And so for us to be able to share this time together in a way that is meaningful and really therapeutic in so many different ways, whatever that means for you, I'm just so grateful for you being here. So what is the story for today? We have 2 sessions. You have me not for one, but for 2 sessions. In our first session, we're going to take a look at the current thinking around compassion fatigue and burnout and occupational trauma. And then we're going to take a look at the evidence around those topics. And there will be some new information that most of us did not get in our education or ongoing training that will be very helpful. In our second session, we'll start looking, we're going to take some deep dives down some big rabbit holes, but don't worry, I got flashlights and snacks and water bottles, I got you. But we're going to look at some of the root causes, and you will have an opportunity to explore if and how you have been affected or are being affected by occupational trauma. Then importantly, we will talk about how you can curate your own innate care plan, which means how you can insulate yourself from the stress and the avoidable trauma that many of us experience in our day-to-day roles, whether it's personally or professionally, and how to leverage your body's innate capacity for healing. For each of us have an innate capacity for healing. And so why wouldn't we draw upon our body's wisdom to make sure that we are optimally thriving and well in everything that we do? Which brings us to the last point, is we'll talk about what does it mean to thrive in life, in your professional roles, and we'll explore that. So for this first session, we're going to spend some getting to know you time. I'll tell you a little bit about me, and then I have a QR code that you will then answer a few questions so we can learn about one another as we come together as this beautiful community. And we'll talk again about the current thinking, the evidence gap, and then what the road ahead looks like. So let's get started. I'll give you a little bit about my story, my background, and how I came to be on this podium before you today, because like all stories, there's lots of twists and turns and ups and downs, and I'm sure in each of your life stories, you have experienced some similar twists and turns and zigs and zags. So a central concept to my work is what I call the healer's heart. All right, so the healer's heart is our why for what matters most. Whether it's why we chose our profession, why we chose to live in the way we did, the people with whom we associate, the activities. All of this comes from what I call our healer's heart. And sometimes, a lot of times, most of the time, our healer's heart gets decimated in our professional roles. And it can be difficult to find our way back to what matters most in our life, whether that's personally or professionally. So my healer's heart was formed at a very young age. So you can see here in the middle photo, that's a picture with I and my grandmother. Both of my grandparents were victims of polio back in the day. And so I grew up with mobility challenged people in my family system, and it was not, she was paralyzed from the diaphragm down, and my grandfather on one whole leg and hip. And so mobility was just something that I saw challenges, I saw a lot of and had a lot of compassion for. And at the age of 15, when most girls were babysitting or waiting tables, I found myself working and cleaning restrooms or washrooms at a skilled nursing facility. And it was my first time ever being really in a healthcare setting of any sort, aside from the pediatrician's office. And there was something that ignited in me. And if you think back to where you make your career decisions, there's something that ignites each of us deep, a calling perhaps, a reason, something that gives us purpose, but why we chose the careers that we chose. So from the age of 15 to 18, I worked in a nursing home. It was called then Skilled Nursing Facility as a certified nursing assistant, a CNA. And before I had my driver's license, before I was old enough to vote, and certainly before I was old enough to date, I was helping people transition at end of life. And so I facilitated a number, and by a number I mean, hundreds of end-of-life transitions in my role as a high school student. And between my grandparents and my own physical challenges, which I was born with a mobility issue as well, and then working in a skilled nursing facility at such a young age, my healer's heart was forged. I could not turn off the caring, compassion switch. It became who I am, and it defined so much of my life. So maybe take just a moment and think about when was your healer's heart forged? What early experiences did you have in your life? They may have been challenging, they may have been sad, you may have made a difference, you may have had a family member or a loved one who struggled in some way, right? But for all of us, we all have the story of our healer's heart, and so just hold that close and keep it nearby as we move through our time together. So my plan was to be a nurse, and off to university I went, and life had other plans. So you can see there I'm in a cast and one of many surgeries to keep me walking, which were all successful. And then when I went to university, I worked at a teaching hospital, still as a CNA. That's how I provided for myself, both during high school and college. And I was on the 4th floor working med-surg. For those of you, how many healthcare providers do we have in here? Yeah, okay, so you guys know med-surg. We've met. And I had a bariatric patient who was well over 350 pounds, and we only had one. There's a special lift, it's called a Hoyer lift, that we use to transport very, very large patients when they can't ambulate on their own. And it was all the way on the other side of the hospital. And my patient went down and instincts kicked in, and I went down first before the patient who fell on me, and I severely herniated 3 discs, L3, 4, and 5, to the point where my career counselor, my workman's compensation people, and my occupational therapist, all of that was like, you cannot. Like, nursing is just like, 21-year-old me did not want to hear that, but nursing is just not something you can pursue, with what you're working with here. And 21-year-old me was like, well, okay, I can barely walk, so that seems like good counsel at this time. And so off I went in a completely different direction. I was a business executive, a mama of 3 beautiful souls, and now 3 beautiful grand souls. And I got into the healing arts and have been a healing arts practitioner for 35 years. Long time. And everything was going along well, I was raising my family, working a career, happily married, kind of living a beautiful life. And then, as happens for so many of us, tragedy struck. Only I didn't know tragedy was striking. So I got sick. And when I say sick, I mean debilitatingly sick, life-threateningly sick, to the point where I could barely walk or move. And no one could figure out what was going on, why I was sick. And I have, all of these kind of, it's anxiety, it's depression, it's IBS, it's chronic fatigue, it's, fibromyalgia, it's all of these things that we can't really tell you what's happening. And I just was refractory. I didn't respond to any of the treatments, and I just kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker, to the point when I would go watch my kids' sporting events, I couldn't even get up in the bleachers, or I'd have to lay down on the field to watch them play. All right, so we're talking really, really ill. And as it turned out, and we found out years later, over a decade later, that the house was riddled with toxic mold. All right. And the science at that time, there was no science. Right. So this was a long minute ago. And I had excellent health care, excellent access to the best specialists, all the way up to UCLA Medical Center chief of rheumatology, who said, we see that you're very sick. And by that, it meant, like, we see that you're dying. They didn't say that, but that was, I felt it, and I was living it. I was just slowly getting sicker and sicker, and getting to the point where I couldn't even hardly move or carry out my activities of daily living. And they said, well, there's nothing we can do. So that took a little minute to process. There's nothing you can do. You're like the best doctor in this whole region. There's nothing you can do. So I sat with that, and I will admit, went through kind of this hope despair process, as many people do when you are, dealing with a major health challenge. And I'm sure many people in this room have similarly had their own journey with a challenging health condition. And so I was like, well, after I went through the despair and hopelessness, emotional processing, then I got mad. I was like, well, just because there's nothing that you, Western medicine, can do, doesn't mean that nothing can be done. Right? And that was an insight where I reclaimed my empowerment from the medical system and took my health in my own hands, because they weren't going to help me. So what do you do with that? So I loaded everything that I needed, and I put it in the back of my truck. Oops, went too far. That's my literal setup. And I lived a year out of the back of my truck in nature. And I went to all the sacred healing sites that I could drive to. I didn't have phones or TVs or any distractions. I had my journal, I had, the things I was doing to maintain my health, and I took to nature to help me with my healing. And so that's what that year looked like, through all 4 seasons, I might add. And this one was really cold. But there I was, and I went to different campgrounds, and I went, I traveled a great deal, and really just focused on self-care, self-reflection, challenging assumptions, looking at other ways of healing. I was already a healing arts practitioner, so I went deep into the integrative ways of being and living and healing in the world, and I started to get better. I started to get better largely because I wasn't in the house that was trying to kill me. But we didn't know that then, right? We didn't know. And so the integrative nature healing gave way into spiritual healing, and really getting existential and really getting into my deepest, truest layers, and connecting with the higher power as I understand and have a relationship, as each of you may or may not, in that way. But for me, it became a very spiritual journey, and I went to every waterfall. Here I'm laying on top of Mount Irazu, which is an active volcano in Costa Rica, because I was stopping at nothing. My mission was that I was not going to orphan 3 children. So that was that's what was not going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I wasn't leaving my babies. Not like this. Not on my watch. And so I started slowly getting better. But at that time, my career, of course, couldn't survive such a challenge. And my marriage didn't survive that challenge either. So here I am in 2008, spending the holidays by myself in a snowy campground, and quite frankly, feeling a little low. You know, there were lots of high points, but there were lots of low points in this journey, because that's what healing is. It's everything. And so I decided to have a ceremony on December 29th, as you can see here. And I was going to transmute everything that was not serving me. I was putting it in the fire, and I was burning it down. Like, it stops now. This was one of those moments in a person's life where you turn the corner. You're at rock bottom, and there's no place to go but up. This was that day for me. And so I wrote down all of the things that I was experiencing: the hopelessness, the persecution, the struggle, the condemnation. I was alienated from my career. I was alienated from my children and my family. I felt abandoned by all in the medical establishment. I was so ill. I really was having failure to thrive, and so many other things that you see here. I felt internally split. I was struggling, and just my life was filled with strife. And I was like, no more. No more. And then I got another log, because I'm good with logs and Sharpies. And on this log with my Sharpie, I was like, this is what I'm replacing it with. Hear me in my spiritual walk. Hear this and know this to be true. That I am going to live a life of my dreams. I'm going to have passion and clarity and wisdom. I'm going to be well. I'm going to be well and thriving in body, mind, and spirit. I'm going to be true to myself. I'm going to have romance, which hasn't happened yet, but I'm open. As you'll see in a minute, I've been busy. So the romance piece hasn't come in yet, but it's still on the log. All right, I want to play. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to pray. I'm going to live a spiritually centric life. I'm going to be love in action. That's who I am. I'm love in action. And I'm going to be healthy, and I'm going to have fun, and I'm going to be well, and I'm going to be determined, and I will stop at nothing to get my life back. I got goosebumps, but it's my story. So, I mean, that was the degree to which I was manifesting my survival, right? And not just survival. I didn't want to survive. That wasn't enough. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to be who I am in my fullest expression. So those logs went into the fire, the Pacific Ocean filled with my tears, and I let it all go. I let it all go. I burned down my entire life. And that was when my adult's healer's heart was forged. Because that's when I reconnected through that devastating illness and all of the sequela that followed. That's when I found my way back to me, to my why, to my what matters most. And then that was led with all sorts of really interesting things happen when you do a paradigm shift in your life such as this. And we're going to talk about I've always been highly intuitive, and that gut instinct, we're going to learn a little bit about what that really is, physiologically speaking, but I've always had that mom's intuition, whatever the vibe is, I've always had it. And then there were these synchronicities that started happening in my life. And I started wondering, is this fate? Is this destiny? Am I living? One of my big things was that I want to live in divine right order. Divine right order, in according to my faith and my beliefs and my convictions. And so things started happening, and I started getting about this time. Now, mind you, my career, no more. Marriage, no more. I'm 48 years old. Going, so this is what ground zero looks like. I've heard about ground zero, but I think I'm here. And I started tuning in to the deeper calling of my healer's heart. And I started spending a lot of time in silence and journaling and getting really clear about what I needed to be and do in this lifetime, because it is a gift. When you are that close to the edge, you realize when you start getting your health back, what a beautiful gift this life is. And so I started getting in touch with this calling, and it's the calling that led me right here to you today. And the calling was, heal the healers. Heal the healers, you say? What does that mean? And I didn't know what it meant, but I felt it. And I don't know if any of y'all have had a calling before, but it is so deep and so visceral and so true that it cannot be ignored, especially if you are living out in nature without any of life's distractions, right? You get real focused real quick. And so I was like, well, I used to be a CNA, said my mind. And I really, it's so sacred. End of life is such a sacred passage. And, it's not for everyone, but it was for me. So maybe I'm supposed to go back to school. Maybe I'm supposed to be a hospice nurse. Maybe that's it. So at the tender age of 50, on the same day that I received my first invitation into retirement subscriptions, and those of you who are of a certain age know what I mean. all of a sudden your inbox and your mailbox looks like an old person's. And at the same day that started flooding in, I received my acceptance into a master's entry program into nursing school. Like, whoa, am I going to retire? Or am I going to go be a nurse? And going back to school at 50, after coming off of a life-threatening illness, well, that took a minute to adjust, but you can see I did just that. I chose to follow that calling to heal the healers, even though I didn't know what that meant. I kept hearing the quote from Martin Luther King Jr., which I'll paraphrase, which is, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You just have to take the next step. Because when you're starting over at ground zero, that staircase can be overwhelming. So let's just focus on this next step, I said. So off to nursing school I went. And I got my RN, earned my master's degree, and was utterly dismayed that nothing had changed from the time in 1980 when I was a CNA working on a med-surg unit at a teaching hospital. The only difference was that we didn't have to wear all whites anymore, because who thought that was a good idea? And no longer did nurses have to avail their seat to a physician if they came to the nurses' station. While you're actively charting and doing your nursing work, back in the day, you had to give up your seat. And the other thing is that the patients were smoking in the rooms back then. So they weren't smoking in the rooms anymore. So that was an improvement. That was one thing that got better. But when you enter the profession, when you re-career and you come in as a 50-year-old woman who has gone through a life-threatening illness and made it through nursing school at that age, which that's a whole nother topic we can get on, right? Only to find out that there was 0% chance that I was going to be successful in practice, because I had been in the healing arts for 40 years. I had been facilitating actively people's healings in integrative ways. And I got into the healthcare system after a long hiatus from my young days, only to find there wasn't much healing happening in healthcare. And that was a wound to my healer's heart. That is not why I went through all of that to become a nurse at that age after everything, right? That was not what I was looking for. But the calling persists. Heal the healers. Heal the healers. I'm like, again, what does that mean? And so I was like, okay, well, where's the next step on the staircase? I am not going to be abused in this way. Not after everything I've come through to like literally save my life. Not happening. So I continued on and earned my PhD because it's like, well, maybe what I need to do is to be a part of the solution is to be external to the healthcare system, because I can't make a difference. I knew as an older woman, a mature woman, I knew I couldn't make a difference in the system if I was encumbered by it and restrained by it in practice. That was my personal choice. And so off I went, let's go do research and find some answers to these big questions. So at the age of 58, I finished my PhD. And then I went on to do 2 postdoctorates, both fellowships, both in integrative health. And that's where I found the bridge between my healing arts and traditional health care, right? It's like, okay, here's a place that I can be that feels aligned with who I am as a person. And I can leverage the healing arts in this way. So I did 2 postdoc fellowships. And then it was time to start my own program of research. So at this time I was, and still am, a university professor at the University of Arizona in the southern part of the States. And so my first order of business was to give back to the people who finally diagnosed the mold illness. You know, that toxic mold, the house. 20 years I lived in a house. All 3 of my babies were born in that house and raised in that house. So it wasn't just me, it was our whole family system. And it was not a physician that diagnosed me. It was a dietitian. Because I was having such GI symptoms that when the gastroenterologist said, well, here's some peppermint oil, good luck with that. We call it IBS, and yeah, there's nothing you can do. How many times have I heard there's nothing we can do for you? It's like, no, that means that there's nothing you can do for me. I have a whole bunch of things I can do and have done. And so the first thing, a dietitian got me to the right provider and into the right community. So my first research project was to partner with this nonprofit. And if any of you or those that you love have been affected by mold illness, here's a QR code. What we did is we put together the evidence base. We created an entire repository of all the evidence-based practices for not only mold illness and treating that, but all environmental illnesses, and also how you can protect your home and maintain your home. So for people in their living rooms that have, black mold growing up, that we have resources for them. So there's a QR code. So that was my first project, and that felt like my healer's heart felt very full because I felt like I had come full circle. And I'd gone through this journey, but I gave back in a way that contributed to people like me. So maybe another mama of 3 didn't have to have her life literally blown down to ground zero as a result of this situation. So I felt good. And what do I want to do next? What's my next program of research? What am I going to do next? And I decided upon stroke research. Because we've had family members, again, how our healer's heart gets forged is that my other grandma, not the one that was shown, had a stroke that ended her life prematurely. And so I was curious about that. And so I started doing stroke research. And as the nurses in our audience can attest that we do a great job taking care of people who are experiencing a stroke in the hospital. And then the minute that we start discharging them home, they go into a chasm. Their whole life has been upended. Husbands and wives now become caregivers. Wage earners can no longer earn wages. Any degree of stroke-related consequences from that, including mobility, ability to speech, personality changes. So it's a very disrupting condition that people go through. And I'm watching myself and my colleagues, and now I'm teaching at the College of Nursing at the University of Arizona, so indeed my students. And we're doing our best to take care of our stroke patients, but then when they get out into the community setting, back into their day-to-day living, they have very little resources to help them. So that's what I focused on for my research. And that brings me to this sort of next curious, was it synchronicity? Is it a precognition? Why was I doing stroke research? I'm not sure, but I was drawn to it, and then tragedy struck again, twice. So that's my beautiful mother, and she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and we had excellent medical care for her, and one of the chemo agents gave her a stroke as a side effect of the chemotherapy agent while I'm doing stroke research. Like, you can't make this up, right? So that was my next research study, was that I developed, I'm one of these kind of conceptual, I like theory and philosophy kind of nurses. And so I developed a community-based transitional care model for stroke survivors and their families that would help ease that transition from hospital to home and that first year of integration into that new uninvited normal. And that's me pointing at my mama saying, I did this research for you, because she, like every other patient that I had seen, sort of got kicked to the curb at discharge. It's like, well, good luck with that. And off they went. So that was really fulfilling. And it was published in the Journal of Neuroscience Nursing. And then I also told her story, which is one of many miracles that we will share for another time, in another publication that talks about miracles. Because she was expected to live 3.5 years to 5 years, given her staging, and she was with us for 15. So we're very blessed, and she entered God's care a few months ago. So we had a beautiful long dance with cancer. She wasn't fighting anything. She was like, the take-home message of her philosophy, and I think it's really true for all of us, she got into her place of surrender and faith, and it's like, well, the doctor's in charge of the cancer, God's in charge of the clock, I'm in charge of living. And that's exactly what she did. And so that felt really good, like how the synchronicity of how did I come to even be, first of all, how did I even come to be doing stroke research at a time when my mom would months into that program of research have a stroke, and this whole thing happened. And so I knew I was doing good work. I felt it, and my whole heart was in it. And but it was just, I wasn't quite on that heal the healers thing yet. I'm like, okay, well, what was my existential cry many times? Like, what do you want me to do with this calling? Okay, all right, I'll take the next step. What is the next step? Well, I started really giving some thought, because, it's interesting. I had these bookmark perceptions and experiences as a very young woman starting out in nursing, and through a series of circumstances couldn't be a nurse then, and then came in at the age of 50. Well, when you enter a profession at 50 with all that life experience, you see things differently. And I trust in the divine right order of why I didn't become a nurse until 50 is because I needed to see what I saw that brought me to you today, right? I would not have seen that as a 23-year-old me. But 50-year-old, 60-year-old me started seeing it. And it's like, why is it from 1976, when I got my start, to now that we are still having the same challenges and the same conversation around compassion fatigue and nurse burnout? And so I really got curious about this nurse burnout. And this was in about 2018 is when I started doing the research for my book. And little did I know I was going to have a front row seat to the events of 2019 to 2021, where I was working directly with nurses who were on the front line, supporting them in my role as an integrative nurse coach who has expertise in nurse burnout. And so that was where I started making my clinical observations, even though I didn't work in a hospital. I had my own community-based, out of my home type thing going on, and in addition to my university work. And so I was really talking to hundreds of nurses before, during, and after the pandemic. And so that gave me this really interesting viewpoint. I was like, this is feeling closer to that heal the healer's calling. I was feeling the resonance kind of, in the healer's heart and a little deeper. And then again, it happened. Those synchronistic events that one cannot explain by empirical means. My eldest daughter decided she was going to be a nurse. And I'm like, oh, great, honey. Are you sure? Yeah, she was living at the time doing her undergraduate studies, and she had seen me working with all of the nurses. I was doing the research. We're talking about it over the dinner table, as families do, and what was going on. And she's like, yeah, Mom, I really want to do this. I was like, okay, well then, you have to follow your healer's heart, and your practice will be very different than mine. And so she went through the same exact program I did at the age of 50, and then as a professor, I gave her master's hood. So it was this beautiful, I got chills again. It was a beautiful full circuit moment. And I knew, as all of us nurses, and my son at the time, he's an attorney, he was going through his first year of legal practice. And I'm watching both of my children, and my third one was still doing her undergraduate work. But my older two were entering their careers and they were getting ground up. Y'all remember your first year, right? I think it's one of the hardest years of a career, is that first one. And so look at this beautiful vibrant. She earned a 4.0 for her GPA. She got an award for clinical excellence. I hired a nurse coach to meet with her weekly to help her with that transition to practice so she wouldn't get traumatized, because after all, that's what Mom does for a living. And this is what happened to her in under 4 months. She went from that beautiful graduate to a burned out, traumatized nurse in under 4 months, living in my home while I'm doing this research. It felt bigger than me. These problems felt bigger than me. But those of you who are papa bears out there, there's nothing like seeing your kids suffer to light a fire in your belly, right? And so my mama bear claws came out. And I was like, oh, heck no. This is how I am supposed to heal the healers. This is it. And I started asking some really big and annoying to many research questions. Like, what if it's not just compassion fatigue? We've been talking about compassion fatigue forever. But have we materially moved the needle in a way that has improved it? Maybe for some, maybe. Events like this certainly do help. But when I look at the collective and I look at nationwide and worldwide statistics, it's not compelling that we've made material difference. And then I'm looking at what I have been through and all of my colleagues and all of the nurses in my care and now my own daughter. What if it's not just burnout? I mean, what if there's something more? So I got busy. And at the time, I was also teaching for the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, which was another synchronous event, which meant that I not only was doing my research in the nursing evidence base, which is home for me, But I also went out to social and behavioral sciences, and I found some big disparities, which is a good thing if you're a researcher, because our job is to poke until we find a hole and then drive a Mack truck through it. That's what being a scientist is, right? And so I started really rabbit holing, and all of my geek flags are flying, and I'm like, this is not just a problem in nursing. This is a problem in social work. This is a problem in law enforcement. This is a problem in the legal profession. This is an issue for teachers and for first responders and all healthcare professionals. And so it occurred to me that we are having a silent epidemic of what? Of what? Why are all of these healers, these helping professionals, for whatever the calling of each of our own healer's heart, why is it that we're suffering so in our professional roles? Because I can assure you it is not a character deficit, and it is not a personality flaw. All right? So those are some big research questions, but now I'm very clear. I'm very clear about what my research is, what my calling is. I'm seeing now more of the staircase. I'm seeing several stairs now instead of just the next one, which was oddly reassuring, overwhelming, but reassuring to have something more than, well, you're going to go get your PhD and then we'll tell you later. All right, and so that led me, that research I chose, I made some strategic choices about my research. First of all, I did not solicit any grant funding, because if you take their money, they tell you what they want to see in results. Not always, but those of you who are in academia and who are scientists in the room, and I see a few, bias exists. And my goal, my mission, my calling was to heal the healers in a way that I could get in your living room for under $20, under $30, and facilitate healing for you in a way that was accessible. Now, did I publish in peer-reviewed journals? Of course I did. It's part of my day job. Of course I did. Did anybody read it? A handful of scholars and scientists. Did it move the needle in a way that helped people heal and improved their life in some tangible way? No. So I didn't take any grant money. I self-funded my research over 5 years across 4 disciplines. And then I chose to write the book in a traditional manner, like you and I are hanging out conversationally, as though you're in session with me as an integrative nurse coach. Not a textbook, not a sciencey thing. We don't need any more of that. What we need is healing, and we need help to thrive in our roles instead of just surviving in them. So I wrote the book, and I had to go to writing school because I'm a scientific writer, and well, that's not how you write books for mainstream. So off I go to writing school to learn how to write a proper book, and published it through a traditional publisher. And I thought, healing the healers, good work. I mean, and it's a lot to write a book when you're working full time. Let me just tell you, this was all my personal time. So I have 6 years of personal time and 6 figures of personal money that I invested because it was my calling. It is what I wanted to do, from my healer's heart to yours and anyone who I encounter. So I thought I was done. Yay me, wrote the book. Good, okay, off we go. Well, no, not quite done yet. Because we all know that books are good for information. They're good for education. A modicum of healing can be facilitated in books. Yes, it's true, it can. But it didn't fulfill my calling to heal the healers in the way that I understood it and felt it. Because what I knew as a healing arts practitioner of over 40 years at this point is that healing needs to be facilitated. That's how it works. We don't give cancer patients a bucket of chemo and adjuvants and send them home, right? We need to facilitate that healing. And so that became the Halen Academy, which is a nonprofit organization that I founded and direct. And we bring educational programs not only to nurses and healers and helping professionals to help them, but also to hospitals who are interested in having a professionally well, safe, and thriving workforce. So that was what was at the top of the dang staircase. And then came the next assignment, the next calling of my healer's heart, which is the book I'm working on now, which is Nursing Our Healer's Soul. And it's in development. And so that is how I got here to you. And now what I'm really curious about is, how did you get here to me? So let's take a moment and grab your phones, and I'm going to have you fill out, I think there's maybe 5 or 6 questions, easy peasy, and then we will take a look together, and all of our online community, if you would jump in too, that way we can see as a global community where we all are. All right, I'm going to start reviewing these. You can continue to complete the little quick survey. So what we have in our beautiful international community that has gathered today, we have about 57% are either in direct provider roles for healthcare or are in other healthcare roles. We have students, we have educators, we have healers, we have law enforcement, legal professionals, and other people from different professional roles. And how beautiful that we can all come together today in this way and learn and grow and insulate ourselves from the harsh working conditions that many of us experience. About 28% of us are thriving in our roles. 16% of us are starting out, we're early career and we're a little bit overwhelmed. About 22% of us are, I don't even know how I'm doing. I'm so busy. I'm just running. I don't even know what I'm doing. And that pretty much describes nursing as I've experienced it. About 21% of us is like, I'm just trying to keep from drowning here, right? Right, so this saddens me that, and 12.6% of us are like, we're over it. Like, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. All right, so we only have less than a third, just like 1 in 4 people, just over 1 in 4. So if you look around your table, only one of you is thriving in your role. All right? I mean, that speaks volumes. All right, let's get through this real quick. And most of us, the vast majority of us, have experienced some to many to even too many hardships that are seemingly insurmountable. And when it comes to spirituality and religion, and this was in service to my next book, so thank you for answering this question, they aren't really connected. You keep your faith separate from your professional role, and on the other end of the spectrum, we have faith as central and guides everything that we do, and that really is representative of the whole spectrum of how we relate in those ways. So I want to thank you for that, and now that I have a better sense of who you are, let us get into the next part of this presentation. And let's talk a little bit about the current thinking that we have around compassion fatigue and burnout. All right, so compassion fatigue. Now, mind you, pink hearts. I want you to do some mind mapping because I have some activities for us. I'm going to divide you all up in teams. And yes, I brought prizes, and no, they're not worth anything. But they're from my heart, so they're worth everything, right? All right, so map in that for the rest of our time together, pink hearts means compassion fatigue, which is a specific form of secondary stress reaction that results from chronic repeated demands on one's time and energy. Well, that sounds like being like a parent too, doesn't it? And the classic symptoms, which we're all familiar with, is the decreased ability to feel empathy or compassion. We're emotionally exhausted and a little bit detached. Now, I want you to just hold that and hold space and curiosity around wondering if there's something more to that. Let's take a look at the current burnout, which is the current thinking, which is green hearts. And we'll look to the World Health Organization, who, in my professional opinion, has a gaslighting definition of burnout. How convenient. Which is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress, wait for it, that hasn't been effectively managed. Shame on you. Shame on you. Is it just me, or is that blaming the victim language? Is that gaslighting? Because when I read it, I'm like, the World Health, I don't want to call you out. I'm sorry, not sorry. So that lit a real big fire under my research. And again, let's take note of these symptoms: depletion, exhaustion, mental distancing, feelings of negativism, decreased professional efficacy. And burnout, according to the World Health Organization, well, it should only be considered in the occupational context, and it should not be used to describe experiences in other areas of life, which implies that we have an on and off switch in our bodies, and I have a body that I take to work with me, and when I come home, I have a different body. And that I am somehow mechanistic, right? And so this definition of blaming the victim and gaslighting holds no system or organizational responsibility for those stressors or those trauma exposures. But we got a problem. We got a big problem. So let's talk about the gap in the evidence, because it got me thinking. This got me thinking. And when I start thinking, that can be either really good or really bad. I wonder if burnout and compassion fatigue, are these just the tips of the proverbial iceberg? So if I went to do my research, again, 4 disciplines, 5 years, 6 years, 6 figures. Oops. And what I came away with was that, indeed, we have that occupational trauma is the silent epidemic that is underneath both compassion, fatigue, and trauma. So occupational trauma, you say. And I have, I think, 3 minutes until our break. Thank you. So, and this will be a perfect place for us to pick up. So what we have as humans, each of us experience, by virtue of being human, individual traumas. An acute trauma, like a car accident, or falling off the ladder while you're fixing your gutters, right? There's a chronic trauma that we experience. For me, that was the mold illness. There's complex trauma, which is any combination of the things you see on the slide here. There's developmental trauma, which includes our in utero, our attachment, and our adverse childhood event traumas. And then there's neglect of all sorts, physical and emotional notwithstanding. And then we get to work. And we have vicarious and secondary trauma, which is unavoidable. It comes with the job. We suffer along with those we are serving, because it's hard work. It's hard emotional work. And trauma from disasters, that is unavoidable. And for many of us, it's part of our professional role to respond to those disasters. But what is driving the compassion fatigue, the burnout, and driving people from their professional roles is the avoidable trauma exposures at work. There's the historical trauma, which would be, in nursing, we have a thing called nurses eat their young, right? And what that is, and I saw that in the legal profession too with my son, there's this, it's not hazing, but it feels like hazing to the person who's experiencing. They get put through the paces, and part of that's in service to their growth, but part of it is a transmission of the unhealed trauma that that person experienced and the person before them experienced, and we somehow have normalized it that it's okay to treat our subordinates poorly while they're transitioning into their roles. All right, so that's historical trauma. Workplace violence, all of the things you've seen in the headlines, and that also includes the workplace incivilities, gaslighting, and so forth. Then there's system-induced trauma, where the system itself is inflicting the trauma. And a great example of this that I personally have experienced when I was battered by a patient and went in following policy, bleeding, literally bleeding, into my supervisor's office after being assaulted violently. And I went in and followed it to file the report and do the debrief and all the things, all according to protocol. And maybe some of you can fill in, what was the first question I was asked? Anybody, any of my nurses out there? Yeah.
What could you have done to avoid the situation?
What could I have done to not get beat up while I'm working for you? All right, that's an example of system-induced trauma, and that puts a whole nother layer of trauma on top of a traumatizing event. And all professional roles have this, and some. Then there's insufficient resources. We don't have the equipment or the personnel or the technology or whatever it is that we need to execute our duties, and that pains our healer's heart, that we know we can and should and have been trained to do more, but we don't have what we need to do that. And then there's second victim trauma, and this is in healthcare, what follows an adverse event or a sentinel event or even a near miss is that, again, we carry that deeply, and it's avoidable because most of the time when root cause analysis is done, it's not the nurse or the provider. Yes, there are some bad actors out there, acknowledging, but in the vast majority of cases, it's a system error. It's a system shortcoming. But we, as the helping professional, carry the burden of that guilt and shame. And so when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what trauma is and how it is stored in each and every one of our bodies, and then what we can do about it.